So, well, they have some in town, but no, but the next one is going to be a boy also.
Chris, I got it.
Okay, welcome to our Women's Forum for women that are concerned about the freedom to choose. And we have 3 doctors. We might have another doctor join us later who is delivering right now. So Dr. Premature, Dr. Menominee, and Dr. Bourne, you would each explain a little bit about where you work and what you do there.
I'm Minnie Premature. I'm a family physician at Atty here in town. I've been here for 15 years. I used to deliver babies. I don't anymore after I had my own, but my partners all still do. We still all do women's care. So.
I'm Heather Nennig. I practice at the Menominee Tribal Clinic. I'm there about 3 years. I deliver babies still, and I did an extra fellowship for a year in high-risk OB, so I use C-sections as well.
She's also our OB department chair at the hospital, so she's like our OB guru.
Excellent.
So I'm Dr. Amanda Bourne-Bernath. I'm also a family physician at Atty here in Shawano. Been here about 5 years. I do full spectrum family medicine, including non-operative OB, meaning I do obstetrics, but I don't do surgeries.
Okay, all right, thank you. Our format tonight is we have some prepared questions, and then we'll get to the questions that you may have and to the questions that are on the YouTube channel. So we'll start.
And if anybody comes up with any more questions, just run them up here and put them in my basket.
Okay. First of all, because of the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, which gave women a right to choose for her health care, what are a woman's options now for dealing with unwanted pregnancy in Wisconsin?
I mean, really, their only option right now is to get to a state where it can go. Right now, closest to us would be Minnesota and Illinois.
So all around us.
Finally have an amendment that's going to be for the midterms of whether or not they can do what Kansas did.
Okay, we did that question.
So when you advise women, do you are there other procedures besides the actual abortion? What ways can you abort? I guess is the question. Rather than going through a medical procedure, what are the ways? I think there's like pills or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there's a medical abortion or a surgical abortion, and these are all elective abortions, or we call those therapeutic abortions in the medical world. Spontaneous abortions are a miscarriage. So the treatment, the medical abortion, is the same exact medicines that we give for a miscarriage. So it's legal to give those medicines if we know that the baby pregnancy has ended. It is illegal to give those in this state, to prescribe those for an elective abortion if the pregnancy is still viable. The other option is a surgical abortion. It's the exact same procedure that we would do for miscarriage. Some people in this room may have even had one of those. It's called a D&C, or a dilation and curettage. It's a very low risk procedure. We do a lot of them very often, again, for miscarriages. It is illegal to do that here in the state of Wisconsin, again, if the pregnancy is viable.
Okay. Any other women?
I just, not about the types of abortion, but I wanted to just make a comment talking about the travel to other states and the implications that has. So that has huge ramifications. In some ways, we're fortunate in Wisconsin that we do have neighboring states where women can go, but even still from here, I mean, that's a substantial drive for a woman who may not have a car, may not have the money to pay for the gas to get there. But there are other states where they don't have bordering states that where it's legal. So it poses a lot of challenges and really hinders access to healthcare.
I also want to add to that abortion services are not covered by most insurances. Mm-hmm. So even when we had services here in the state of Wisconsin, most of those were out of pocket, unless they had finances through essentially people who donated to those clinics. So most women, even before this law went into effect, they still had to pay for that procedure or those pills to be given.
And the average cost of an abortion is $500. That's average. So again, we're looking at a population for the most part that is not going to have that kind of money just sitting around.
That's true. So, are there is there any help for women that, like prenatal care? I know there used to be Planned Parenthood here in Shawano, but those have kind of gone away. Is there any way that women can get any kind of help, prenatal help, or help with delivery, or, or not, with, if they don't have insurance? Is there any?
If they have to carry the pregnancy to term,
Yeah.
is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, and state Medicaid generally would cover prenatal care if a woman had to carry the pregnancy to term.
They have to be on that program.
I'm just going to remind everyone to speak up, so for the recording purpose, just so we can hear you nice and clear.
Most hospitals and clinics will help sign a woman up for Medicaid so that the pregnancy is covered, and then generally they do not have any out-of-pocket expense from that.
Okay. And I wanted to touch base on, you had mentioned, the hardship of having to drive to another state and the financial difficulties it poses to some people, but it's also women who can afford it and have the resources who, a friend recently had a family member who had a wanted pregnancy, and found out that it was not viable, would not survive after birth, and had to go through the stress and trauma of driving to another state. It's not right.
Have you ever had patients that you've had to walk through that process with, or it has, since the law has been repealed, have you talked to any of your patients about that?
Certainly letting them know what their options are and are not anymore. Yes.
I've actually had more patients since Dobbs went through that had told me if I could get an abortion in this state, I would, but now I can't. So what now? Before this went through, I've never had anyone tell me that. I've counseled people on that option. But it's really disheartening because it's been multiple patients who've told me that. And that's just since June.
Before they didn't have a need to tell you, they could just do
Right.
it.
They could just go.
Okay. I just want to.
Online questions.
Yeah. I just want to tell people a little bit about exactly how this, what law is in effect right now. It's the 1849 law, which is a near total ban on abortion, actually 71 years before women had the right to vote. It's a Class H felony for anyone other than the mother to intentionally destroy the life of an unborn child. The maximum penalty is 6 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. The law provides an apparent exception for medically necessary abortions to save the life of a mother, but that's it. And it used to be like, it started out when it was first passed that if you felt the baby quicken, in other words, move, that was, then you couldn't have an abortion anymore, but you could before that. And it actually got worse in 1858. They removed that, prohibiting any kind of unborn child from from an abortion. So that's the law we're under right now. And my question is, are you concerned that you'll be breaking the law by the things that you say to your patients?
No, I'm not concerned with the things that I say by any means. certainly if I were to prescribe a medication that could cause an abortion, I would be breaking this law. And we certainly fear for ramifications from that. However, currently, Governor Evers has said that he will not prosecute physicians under this law, that we will not be subject to this. So that could certainly change.
So I think that fear, though, is definitely impacting medical care. So in an instance of an ectopic pregnancy, so a embryo that is in the fallopian tube, which is not viable, it's not possible to go to term. If it goes too far, it puts the mother's life significantly in danger, can die from it.
Right.
And so if a woman comes into an ER and has an ectopic pregnancy, if there is a heartbeat detected, it requires 2 physicians to independently evaluate that woman and say that that is the case before you can proceed with the medication that saves her life. Which in a big city or a town, even like this, where there's multiple doctors, it still can put a woman's life at risk if there's any delay.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're in a real rural area, a one doc shop, so to speak, and a woman comes into your ER with an ectopic pregnancy and there's no other doctors in sight, you're put in a position to do what you know is right for that, to save her life, or put your license at risk. Horrible position.
Yeah.
I just want to frame what 1849, like what medicine looked like back then. Most physicians were barbers and they were surgeons, and they were dentists. There weren't specialties, there weren't ER doctors, there weren't, again, even surgeons, there weren't general practitioners. They did everything. And we didn't have ultrasound, we didn't have pregnancy tests. We didn't have just x-rays. We didn't have all the kind of, not even super modern things we think about in medicine. That didn't exist in 1849. So that's what makes this law even more frustrating, is that no one's willing to kind of really talk about that.
And the other part too, you're reading that law, using the definition of quickening. Quickening happens well into the second trimester. The vast, vast majority of all abortions are completed in the first trimester, 80 to 90% across all ethnic groups. So it's really another point that's not relevant about it.
When you talked about needing the approval of 2 doctors to do it, can it be a standard family practitioner, or does it have to be a specialist, an OBGYN?
The current law says that it does not, because again, it was written in a time when that didn't exist. It doesn't actually have to be an OBGYN.
Okay.
So it can be an ER physician, it can be one of my fellow family physicians, it can be an OBGYN over the phone if there's no one else around. But it does add a significant barrier to even the one exception there is to this law. Because if it's 3 a.m. and you can't wake anybody up because no one's answering their phone and a woman's bleeding to death, it's pretty terrifying.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Go on here.
Some years ago, anyways, I was the person that kind of started at the Planned Parenthood clinic here in town and was the director for a number of years. And, I guess I've just seen a number of people in a number of situations that chose abortion. And, at that point, if the person had a positive pregnancy test, there were places to refer people to. Planned Parenthood didn't do abortions, but there were clinics that did. So I'm curious now what happens, because I know one of the things too at that time is the person went to a physician who did not support abortion. They got no referrals. And so I'm curious what happens now. I'm going to say it's a teenager, it's another person, it's a person of incest, rape, whatever. What happens? what does the person do? Where do they turn now? I mean, because I'm sure not every doctor is going to say, oh, here's the list. I'll make a phone call for you. What happens? You know, what does a person do? I mean, they find out they're pregnant for whatever reason, they choose not to continue the pregnancy. What do they do in Wisconsin?
I mean, I suppose nowadays probably the first place they look is online. You know, not that
Yeah,
they're always
but-
going to find the best information. I think
Do
But they-
physicians hand out a list and say, these are the numbers you can call? I mean, I'm just curious I now know there's online, but maybe tell me what
I mean, you can share, at this point, you are able to share names of facilities where it is legal. So there are
Okay.
lists. Yeah, I mean, I guess I can't answer if they walk into a doctor who is opposed to that, what's going to happen. I would hope that they turn around and walk out and go get a second opinion.
And then when they go to another state, do they need to stay or have a return visit? Do they need to, I mean, it doesn't just happen in 1 hour and people leave, right? I mean, do they need to stay overnight?
It depends on the procedure. So if you're in a situation like Dr. Pomodig's friend, where you have a fetus, a future baby that will not survive on the outside, and you are far enough along to know that, which is usually past 20 weeks, which is about halfway through the pregnancy when you get your big ultrasound, the anatomy ultrasound, when you find out if it's a girl or a boy. That can be that's a 2-day procedure. And not all facilities do those. And so you usually have to stay overnight. If you're just getting the medical abortion, which are the pills, then they will give you the pills and they will ship you home, which is another problem actually, because if it's not successful, then you're having physicians who maybe don't know how to deal with the complications of those pills, now having to care for it in a completely different state. Which I've actually had a patient like that. She had a medical abortion in Minnesota, came back, was having terrible bleeding and pain. Luckily, she didn't need a procedure, but that's going to happen more and more here.
Okay, that comes to another question I was going to ask is, now that we have the pills, and I think it's basically, I give you this pill and you take it here in front of me, and I give you the other pill to take home and you take it tomorrow. Then you go through miscarriage, correct? Is that generally the way it goes?
If it works, yes.
If it works. Okay. My next question then is, what generally is a doctor's preference? Would they rather do a hands-on rather than pills? As in a DNC, would they rather go in and get it out or give the pills? Which would be
So-
their preferred
So
option?
not all physicians can do DNCs, right?
Mhm.
Like I do not do them.
I understand.
Dr. Premature does not do them. So again, you're limiting your access. A patient's access becomes even more limited, right?
Okay,
Because there are fewer people that do them. So I mean, because you do both, you may have a preference, but I think it's very situational.
So I would counsel that woman the same as I counsel a woman who had a miscarriage. Again, if I could do this in the state. There's, for miscarriages, there's always 3 options. Wait and see, which of course is not an option for an elective abortion, pills, or the procedure. And so I would leave it up to the patient
okay,
and talk to her about the risks and benefits of both of those.
okay. And they would like to know who, well, I think we have sort of answered this, but very specific, one more time. Who can get an abortion?
Here in this state, you mean?
Yes, here in this state.
Nobody legally, unless the circumstance of an ectopic pregnancy with the, verification of 2 physicians.
Or if she's about to die,
Hemorrhaging.
Yeah.
which actually gets very tricky.
So her life is in serious danger.
Yes.
But
And
again,
that's
still
not-
requires 2 physicians to say that that is the case, that her life is in imminent danger.
We've had, 2 years ago, we kept having numerous commercials by people talking about late-term abortions. To me, when I hear late-term abortion, I'm thinking that baby is large enough to survive outside the womb, and I would just call that a early delivery. But I don't know. Is there such a thing in reality as a late-term abortion? Not in Wisconsin, anywhere, just for the fact of understanding. If somebody comes in at 7 or 8 months.
So I have a little bit of data I can show you. So is there a thing? Sure. Can you? Sure. Is it possible? Does it happen? Very rarely. Okay. So this is the abortions by gestational week divided by race and ethnicity as of 2019. Okay. So less than 9 weeks across the board, we're at about 80%.
Mhm.
When you get over 21 weeks, you're looking at about 1% across all ethnicities.
Okay.
So can it happen? Yes. Does it happen? Not often.
And I would ask the situation in which that's happening. Because again,
Right.
there are many situations that the fetus or the baby is not going to be viable at birth, or they're going to be only able to live for a couple days. That doesn't happen that unusually, unfortunately. So I would wonder how much of that 1% is in those situations where the mom wanted that child, but the child cannot survive out of her womb.
Gotcha.
There's also extenuating circumstances where women have not been able to, for whatever reason, seek prenatal care. So they
Okay.
present for prenatal care at a very advanced gestation. So, and again, you may find something wrong with the pregnancy, there's a lot of reasons, and it would be extreme circumstances that would happen.
Okay. People are curious about the opinions of patients that you have. What are their childbearing aged patients? Okay. In this area, have they said anything about this law, about this overturn by the court?
Mhm.
You're getting a lot of feedback on it?
It's definitely a conversation that I didn't have prior to Dobbs. And they'll ask what are their options, even preemptively.
Right.
Their access to Plan B, they make sure, I think they're a little more proactive to make sure that they, in circumstances that they have it.
I've encountered a lot of reproductive age women who are concerned about the trickle-down effect of what this will mean for contraception, specifically down the road. And a lot of women are choosing long-term implanted contraception rather than the pill because they know that at least they'll be covered for 3 to 7 years instead of with a pill, which they may not be able to get, is their fear, right? Right now, that is
Sure.
not relevant to this law, but I think we all have that fear. What's next? What
Yeah.
are we going to take away next for women's health?
There's an increased rate in vasectomies.
Yeah.
Also in young men. And part of me thinks that's a good thing, right? Because men are taking part of the responsibility, which is great. But some of these are young men who have not had kids, who are making a life-altering decision, potentially, that could affect their ability to have a child down the road.
Should they change their
Should
mind?
they change their mind? And that did not happen pre-Dobbs.
That's very interesting.
And I think I asked too with just the trickle down effect once more, fertility treatments, creating embryos and whatnot, like how you see that potentially playing out and going to French and things for couples in that
I
situation.
think that there's probably a lot of really sticky legalities with that, like frozen embryos, things like that. I don't have the answer or expertise to say, but it could certainly come into play.
I think the biggest risk with the IVF ends up being the issue of because of success rates, historically they would implant, in some cases, multiple embryos. And because of the increased risk to the mother of too many, in some places they do selective abortions.
Well, and also increased risk of ectopic. So when you do in vitro fertilization and you do more than one embryo, one of them can be viable, one can be ectopic. So the mother is at higher risk for needing intervention.
I mean, there's laws being talked about, not here in Wisconsin, but in other states, about life starting at conception. And that would be pretty terrifying for the IVF community, that, in vitro fertilization or fertility clinics, because any embryo that is not viable, either because it's selectively stopped from growing or because it dies, because that's sometimes what happens, or whatever, that could be a serious blow to that entire part of medicine.
Of patients that have brought it up in the exam room, I've had several older women bring it up, talking about their worries for their granddaughters and their great-granddaughters, and acknowledging that, I mean, there are a lot of older women who wound up in marriages that were not healthy because they got pregnant pre-Roe by their husband, did not or didn't have that option, and wound up in long abusive relationships. And they talk about that and their fear of what's going to happen to their granddaughters and great-granddaughters.
They've also asked, when I ask you about opinions of women regarding this, of patients, have you had patients come out on the other side of it and say they're fine with it because they're against abortion anyway? Has that occurred at all?
I haven't had any patient verbalize that to me, but I also work at the travel clinic, which tends to be a little bit more left-leaning. But yeah, so I haven't had anyone verbalize that.
This was pre-Roe v. Wade being turned over. However, I have had one patient that doesn't see me anymore because she said, well, I assumed because you have 3 children that you are pro-life. And I said, well, that was not the correct assumption. I believe in a woman's right to choose. So she stopped seeing me as a provider.
Okay.
I want to take a quick side note and say that I don't agree with pro-life as a statement, because life also is the mother. I think that you should identify as anti-abortion, that is, or anti-choice, if you want to not use the abortion word. But to say you're pro-life and to have some of these very extreme views, in my opinion, about abortion, that tells me you don't actually care about the life of the mother, which is not pro-life.
That's exactly how I feel. Okay. Talk about not allowing abortion for incest or rape victims.
So as the law currently stands, it is not allowed. That is what the law says. So it cannot be done legally here in Wisconsin. So it would go back to that original conversation of really counseling patients and helping them find an alternative option and an alternative state.
I think the really unfortunate thing is that in the old archaic law that we now are under, they talk about, unless in the case of poses a threat to the woman's life. Well, I think that is thought of as only as a woman is actively in duress, actively dying from a pregnancy complication. I think that's a really narrow way to look at it. I think incest rape victims, the rates of suicide are significantly higher. Should they now be forced to carry a pregnancy to term, those rates, I think they're going to start to see those go up. I think the mental health impact this is going to have on women is far too overlooked. Their life might not be actively in danger this moment from carrying this pregnancy, but as their mental health gets chipped away at every week of that pregnancy.
Right.
I'm a member of the Wisconsin Maternity Mortality Team. The CDC has one in every state. And I can tell you that a majority of deaths within either the pregnancy period or 1 year after the pregnancy is ended, most of those are mental health related, overdose related, suicide or homicide. So they're not like the complications we think of with pregnancy, bleeding to death, really bad high blood pressure causing strokes and bad things like that. Even though that still happens, again, a majority here in the state of Wisconsin and across the country is mostly mental health related and kind of interpartner violence related. Which is heavy.
Okay, if we're talking about adolescents, even 10-year-olds, 10 to 14-year-olds, is her risk for future pregnancies increased if she carries a baby or if she has it aborted? Does either side put them at risk for having babies in the future? As it used to, young girls who had abortions found that once they got married and things, they couldn't get pregnant because of it. So is that still a case, and does that affect our young girls?
I don't have data on that.
I can say as the one who does, again, surgical OB here, that if you have multiple DNCs, we're talking 4 or 5 or more, usually for miscarriages, but could be for elective abortions, that does increase your risk of having issues with fertility. There gets to be more scarring in the uterus, which then is harder to carry a pregnancy. In general, that does not happen after 1 or 2 or even 3.
Good.
So women are more fertile, usually after you have a miscarriage. I don't know the data of whether or not that's true after, again, elective abortion. But I don't know of any data that tells me that they would be unable to have children or that would affect their ability to have children later on in life.
Okay, good.
Would the size of the pelvic area be a real concern of a 10-year-old?
I was gonna say, I think it would pose a much greater risk to have the pregnancy to term because of the musculoskeletal issues that would result and lifelong problems with hips and backs and ability to carry another pregnancy at an older age, things like that. It's horrible, just overall answering this question, the options are very few. We don't have options. That's kind of the point, right? There's a law saying we can't do this, and it's horrible. So it's we're dealing in a very, very limited situation, but the hope is that we fix it, right? That we rectify
Right, absolutely.
Because
we need to vote.
Because we need to have these options available. Because an incest or rape victim should not have to have a baby regardless of their age, right? The other part of this too is when you think about all of the social net that is needed, right, for a victim of incest or rape, especially if they are adolescent or pre-adolescent. We simply do not have the social structure to support that. We don't have enough social workers. We don't have the financial support. We don't have the counselors or the mental health services that is needed for that kind of thing, right? So not only are we forcing people to proceed with this life-altering, detrimental thing, but we have no support to offer them. It's a horrible situation.
It is. Thank you for all that. You're gonna love this. Senator Ron Johnson said, give it to me, what did he say?
If you don't like it, leave the state.
That's right. If you don't like it, you can move.
Or we can just all vote. Yeah.
Clap back.
Well, I think it's just a classic example of, I think, everybody being frustrated with men, especially older men, who have, this is not at all relevant to his life or his worldview, and making decisions for a population that he knows nothing about. So, yeah, I mean, I think the power is in our ability to vote, and, you know, it also illustrates how much he does not embrace diversity in any way, shape, or form.
Or adversity.
Yeah. So I don't think that that's a real positive person to have representing our state, but there we are.
It doesn't seem to me, oh, shall I give my opinion?
No.
All right.
Do we have questions on YouTube?
Nothing
No.
I did want to
Not
make a comment about that we might lose OBs and high-risk OBs from this state because of this law.
There's talk of that already. I'm reading quite a bit of that on social media, that we're going to lose, the professionals. It might come down to it that they will actually look for a different area for practice. The other thing too that I will bring up is that and this is something that I learned, and just looking at you three doctors up there, and the years of education that you have behind you, that as family sizes increase, the burden of childcare also goes up. I was amazed at $15,000 a year per kid in daycare setting. So, the other thing that happen among professional women is that if, especially if birth control and other, forms of birth control, whatever the pill are taken away, I see a lot of professional women having to forego their professions to stay home and raise kids, professions that you went to college for, professions that you paid, college paid for, what have you. Then that financial burden is going to be on a significant other. So if you're in your 30s, 40s, you have your $200,000, $300,000 home and the lifestyle to go along with it, and you have a double income family and you lose that income, where does that leave that family financially? When we look at no support for adolescents and or maybe their families that are supporting them through this pregnancy because they can't have the procedure done, it isn't just those, young people in that regard. This decision is impacting women of all age groups, all financial levels. It's going to be a burden on a lot of people.
Absolutely.
I don't want to see our young women like yourselves or other women coming out of college being forced into a situation of having to forego that education because somebody took a choice away from them.
Exactly. Yeah, I think there are so many ramifications that, like that situation, that we're not even considering at all. And it's
So we won't just lose doctors.
Yes.
You're going to lose professional women that are CEOs of companies, maybe possibly. Like I said, young women coming out of university, in other areas, that spend a lot of money on education, or those that have already, business owners. You could have young entrepreneurial women that are already financially hurt because they've gone into a business, they put all of their income into that. Now, if they start having children, that money's going to be gone too. And they're dreaming their own business.
I think there's such a misperception that people about abortion opponents think it is all women of abortions are promiscuous. They should have just been responsible. They should have taken precautions. That is not the truth. There are so many women who need abortions who are they're married. They have families, but it might be that the woman may have no control over her fertility, depending on the power dynamic in the marriage. It may be that with the third child they already have, they are barely hanging on and barely able to feed those kids. And now she is pregnant again. That's not a promiscuous woman. Not that, and not that it should matter either way. But I think there is just a misperception of who is who is in need of these
Right.
services. Yeah. And I think just to clarify, like what you're saying, I think that there's two sides, right? There's the side of if a woman, a professional woman or otherwise, is forced to have a baby when they do not want to, there will be long-term financial impacts to that. I think the point that Dr. Nenning is making is that, nobody, regardless of their profession, likes to feel like they can't do their job. And that in medicine, to feel like we can't practice medicine and do the best thing for the patient. Well, and if that is taken away, it has been taken away, people are not going to want to practice here. So physicians will leave, which will put hospitals overall at risk, which will take other health professionals, nurses, therapists, everything, it all crumbles, right? So it's really, really important to consider the broader impact that this is going to have, right?
I mean, again, going along those lines too, people might not apply to our colleges from out of state because they don't want to be put in that situation. People, again, might not take jobs here because they could live in a different state where they would have, maybe they would work for a company that would even cover those services if they were to need them. And there are some women who should not be pregnant because they're too sick. Like women on transplant lists, women who have terrible heart disease. And sometimes by the miracle of life, they get pregnant, but they know that they shouldn't be because it's too dangerous for them to be pregnant. And now the places where they could go before and get that care, those providers may not want to stay there because it's really hard to do their jobs. The best high-risk OB doctors are in places like UW-Madison and Frederick or Medical College of Wisconsin. If it gets too hard to do their jobs, those are really talented physicians. They can just go somewhere else. And that's really terrifying to me because that's not a we're going to see this now situation. We're going to see this in a couple of years situation. And that means that even women who need that care, who want to continue those pregnancies, now may not get the best care in this state anymore because of that situation.
And we already knew even before this that, where we, like here, we're a moderately sized town at about 10,000, but this is still considered rural practice. So, our hospital serves 3 counties, and women have to travel quite a bit of distance. It already puts them at increased risk. So then add this on top of it. You're disproportionately affecting women from rural areas. And that's going to directly impact us, our loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
It's scary.
You briefly mentioned before that basically those of us in this room see things. We talked about seeing things from a white person's view. And you mentioned about we need to see how it affects other diversities. Can you talk about that? How are they different than us? Whether it be the natives, whether it be the African Americans, whether it be the Hispanic.
So women in the state of Wisconsin who are Black have the highest rate of maternal mortality in the entire United States of America. I will say that again. Women who are Black who live here in the state of Wisconsin have the highest rate of maternal mortality in the entire United States of America. So it will affect them disproportionately poorly because those are the women who probably need those services more than I do, being a white privileged woman. And now they will not have a lot of them may not have the resources to travel to get that done. So more women are going to die in this state because of this law. And unfortunately, that's almost guaranteed.
And this is, really this, to answer this question, it's statistics. We know how much more dangerous pregnancy is for non-white women than for white women. And again, that comes down to statistics of education level, socioeconomic, financial stability, all of those things. That's what it comes down to. And I think recognizing that even though there are a lot of white women who are in really tough situations, right? I'm not minimizing that in any way, but recognizing that is really important for all of us.
Thank you for that.
Shown that the mortality does not really change that much, even when you factor in socioeconomic status and education. So women, for example, a black doctor still has a significantly higher mortality rate than a white doctor when she gets pregnant, and complication rate.
Yes.
So, and that's just, they think just literally generational stress, like generations of being treated poorly in many different ways.
Generational stress
Sure.
and bias.
And bias, yeah.
Bias.
And keep in mind, we're the worst in the US from that statistic. The US has the worst maternal morbidity and mortality rate in developing countries,
So you said
developed countries.
Wisconsin, African American women in Wisconsin, of other African American women, has the highest mortality?
Yes, it has been that way since I was in medical school.
What do you attribute to that?
There's a lot of very smart people working on that, smarter than me. So again, a lot of it I think is that generational stress, systemic racism, and a lot of it they're still trying to figure that out.
But I should think that would affect them no matter what state they live in.
It should, which is why again there's a lot. I don't like to get too down the rabbit hole, but
No,
why
that's
there's
fine.
a lot of smart people trying to figure out and try to close that gap.
Okay,
This is quite a bit off topic, but Wisconsin has a long history of racism, and because it kind of came to the game later after the Great Migration, we're some of the worst, right? Because we're dealing with it in a newer sense. There are a lot of books that are written about this. If people are interested, I have suggestions, but that's part of the reason why Wisconsin is worse than, for instance, a southern state. Then I can give personal anecdotes. I grew up in the Milwaukee area. I did my residency, did OB in the Milwaukee area. Milwaukee is predominantly African American. There's a lot of racism in the Milwaukee area, and that's where the majority of African American women are. The St. Joseph's Hospital, if any of you are familiar with it in Milwaukee, it was always known as the baby hospital. Okay? I was born there. My mother was born there. That is where I did my residency, and it has shifted to a predominantly African American hospital, and then you get this outside racist view that it is no longer as quality of a hospital, meaning that people stop going, the money stops coming in, and then it goes into decline, right? So, I mean, that's just a very personal example, right?
thank you for that, because I think that's something that we weren't really aware of, how they can so subtly do it,
Yeah, I mean, not to get further in the weeds, in the history of the whole anti-abortion movement is based on racism and not
Mhm.
the Bible, as people want to say. the history of it, if you look back on it, that is where it came from anti-segregation movements, desegregation movements.
And I also just want to mention, then I do work at the travel clinic, and in general, Native Americans are not actually included in those studies on either maternal outcomes or maternal mortality. So our data is very poor. So we actually have no idea, compared to the data of the other races, how Native Americans do with, again, morbidities, mortality, even intermortality. So sometimes we just also don't have the data to tell us how we're doing.
And I know for a long time, the law was that if you had an abortion on a reservation, you were also required to be sterilized. That stopped,
Going
I'm
pretty far
hoping.
back.
No, it's not that far. It's not. Say it's finished.
We haven't done abortions on the Menominee Reservation.
Okay.
For as long as I know of. They had a hospital pre-1960s. I have no idea if they did them then, but we haven't done them there at least for 50 years.
Okay. Are any of the larger healthcare providers in Wisconsin lobbying for women's choice?
That's a really good question. And I don't know the answer. I think, unfortunately, it a lot of times comes down to us as individual providers to have these conversations. And that's not enough, because we know that the reality is that lobbying makes a difference.
Mm-hmm.
I do not know of any local, maybe like Freighter or UW-Madison, but I don't know of any local healthcare agencies that are lobbying or trying to correct this.
I know that all the, pretty much every medical society has come out saying that this is a human right and it should be allowed. Those services should be available, which is highly unusual. I mean, most medical societies can't agree even like on when to get a mammogram for women. Like there's honestly like 5 different recommendations of when and how often we should give mammograms for women. But again, every professional society, whether that's the OBGYN society, that's ACOG, AFP, which is the Family Physicians, AMA, which is just the American Medical Association, which is traditionally very conservative. All of them say that abortion services are a human right, and that they should be allowed for women.
They're essential.
Do you know if they put that on TV or have they advertised that? I mean, I see a lot on TV, and I guess then my next question is, what do you suggest that we at the state and county level should do to support choice? I mean, I know we can vote out Ron Johnson, but, our state representatives are highly Republican. And I'm just curious, do you know of any movement that's happening in the state? I mean, I get a few phone calls, but I really don't know of anything major.
I know the Wisconsin ACOG chapter has been very vocal on its, again, ACOG stance of being pro-choice, essentially. I think the best thing you can do is just educate everyone you know. I mean, educating and voting. I mean, I think a lot of people, again, have this very pigeonholed view on abortion, and it is truly all shades of gray. And just talking to people. I know it's a very uncomfortable thing to talk about, especially with family members or close friends who don't have the same views as you. But I think it has to come from everybody.
And it's a little bit tricky with that too. Medical colleges, and when I say that, I mean like academies, like in each, as she said, each group of medicine, we have our own college or recommendations that we follow, right? AFP is American Academy of Family Physicians. That's what we all are members of. So we're not political organizations, right?
Mhm.
Medical recommendations. This is an interesting crossroads where it has had to become political, but it shouldn't be. It should just simply be medical, right? So, no, you're not going to see ads, for instance, of these colleges making these statements because that's not what they do. That's not their role, or hasn't been.
I was gonna say, or should.
Or hasn't been, yes. But I mean, so that's a really tricky thing, right? And then I was gonna say something else. Maybe it'll come back to me. Got distracted.
If they endorse a candidate, like, I mean, is that still crossing over too much? Probably.
I have never heard of a medical college endorsing a political candidate. I've never heard of it.
Again, most of, as Dr. Bourne was saying, they're apolitical, you know.
Mhm.
Of course, the members have thoughts on, and probably lean one way or the other. But I think I can't foresee that happening. So I know there's a question in the back.
With you working on the reservation, are the rules, the laws exactly the same for you?
That's actually a very good question. So the Menominee Reservation is the only reservation in the state of Wisconsin where hypothetically you could do an abortion and not get prosecuted by state law. However, it would have to be done by a native provider on a native patient. And we don't have the facilities for that, and we have at this point, as of now, decided that is not something we plan to pursue. But many people came to us, people being groups, saying, hey, you are this special form of a tribe where state law doesn't really apply to you. Would you think about this? And as it stands right now, we have said no.
Yeah, I read some articles about the funding just not being available, but I hadn't read about has to be a native provider on a native patient.
Yeah,
It's
it gets
interesting.
very, tribal law is crazy. So it's complicated, but we, for now, have said no.
Okay, thank you.
You reminded me what I was going to say when you said funding. You asked what else we can do. If you have the means and the ability, you can donate directly to clinics that do provide those services. Granted, that would be donating out of state at this point. But the vast majority of abortion clinics are run on purely donations because they do not receive adequate funding from the state or the federal government. So they are run purely on donations. So it is really, really important to donate if you can.
I do believe that Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin is helping fund people, at least the transportation to get there. If that is the organization that you agree with, they are continuing, even at the state level, continuing to help women get access to those services out of state.
So I think that,
Thank you. We did touch on this and say that doctors will be leaving if things don't change. Someone would like to know, have you seen an impact on the numbers of medical students at this point pursuing obstetrics as a discipline? I guess maybe they want to know, not pursuing obstetrics
I don't think
anymore.
we would see that impact quite yet. The round of admissions for medical school would have already occurred essentially.
Yeah.
But I think we certainly will. Like if a person who is training to do full spectrum obstetrics needs to learn how to do these procedures and they cannot learn them in the state of Wisconsin, they will not come here to train.
So I'll just mention that I met 2 medical students who are going into obstetrics and gynecology who are 4th years, which means that they're at the end of their time. And I asked them if this had made a difference in where they decided to apply. And they said that it didn't because, one, OBGYN is a very competitive specialty to get into now. So they had to apply to at least 50 places, which is a lot. And 2, that by current, we call it ACGME, it's the overarching body that determines what all specialties should do in their specialty. That OBGYN has to still require all of their training programs to have their trainees learn how to do elective abortions. So, but if you come to any state, of course, where that's not legal, then you have to go out of the state to get that training, which I think, again, will probably be impacting things down the road.
And would it be, they go out of state for just that segment of training, or are they gonna have to go for the whole residency?
I don't think we know.
We don't know.
I think having to go through hardships like that, though, just to train for what you've spent your life training for.
Yeah.
Will make people not want to continue to stay in a state like that.
Okay, and this one, someone handed this to me, and I gotta tell you, it's something I'm concerned about. Is there a concern amongst medical about returning to the days of back alley abortions?
It's already happening. Yes. Yes.
I think people who say, oh, well, I'm pro-life, I think this is all wrong. A lot of them are too young to remember what women went through and how many women died from it,
So my mother, actually, she went to high school pre-Roe. She doesn't watch this and know I'm dating her. So at the end of high school, Roe went through. And even though she's been a devout Catholic her whole life, she's always been pro-choice because she had classmates who would tell her these terrible stories of what they would do to themselves to get rid of their pregnancies. And I think that fear is far bigger in that generation, like my mom's generation, because they saw that. I think my generation and the generation below me don't even realize that that is a terrible consequence of the Dobbs decision that we will now have to grapple with again.
And I think it undoubtedly will happen, I mean, these women are in desperate, dire situations, and an unsafe back alley abortion that can lead to death or infection seems like a better option than having a baby.
or perforations or numerous things that they've done.
Pre-Roe, in most major hospitals, there was an entire ward of septic abortions. And that means there was an infection after someone did essentially an abortion to themselves, or someone with little medical training did one on them. Literally entire floors of these women. And after Roe, that pretty much disappeared. The OB providers I trained with, they saw that because they trained in that time, and they're like, this is going to come back again.
With the law the way it is, if a woman comes in after having a poor procedure, can you even treat that individual? Under the law the way it is today?
If her life is in danger, yes. If the baby, again, I put baby in quotes, if the pregnancy is still viable, then it would have to be the 2-physician situation where you have to have 2 other physicians agree with you that this woman is in dire need or potentially dying.
That's in Wisconsin, but there are several other states that are not allowing any treatment that they would for any kind of impact type thing.
I think once if you're talking like a post-abortion complications, I mean, if there's not a viable pregnancy, if there's not a detectable heartbeat, then I don't think they cannot. There are some states though where they are asking medical professionals to report the woman
And
to law
As it used to
enforcement.
be too, they had to go to jail if they tried to have an abortion.
They're arresting them.
Which is But no, I don't, there would not be any legal implications to treating a woman for complications after
Okay.
a procedure.
I have a question, and I'm just not aware how it stands or what you feel when a child is born, when it's born premature. What are the weeks that you think it's going to survive and or that it's going to survive and be healthy? Is there a cutoff?
You share the stats.
So, I mean, so the current there's a little bit of wiggle room, but about standard of viability is 24 weeks.
That's what, 25 is what I use, so that's.
The mortality
Great.
rate, even with a 24 weeker, as they call them, is still roughly half. So even though they could potentially survive, they have a roughly 50-50 chance of not surviving.
Okay.
And then you get into the whole morbidity part of it. So, some of these kids have brain bleeds and have significant cognitive issues. Some of these kids become blind or have significant eye issues, gut issues. I mean, there's it's not just, oh, well, the baby survived, of course, and you mentioned that, but really the complication rate goes to nearly zero by about 34 weeks. And I'm sure everyone's like, that's a long gap from 24 weeks, and it is.
Yeah, a lot of development.
Have you had any women that have tested for genetic, so far? Because there are families that have genetic mutations where, when you were talking about where a woman shouldn't carry a pregnancy, have you run into any women yet that are concerned they've gone through this, or how is that going to be handled in this situation where a child could be born severely handicapped just based on the genetic testing?
I've only run into it once so far in a relatively affluent, well-educated patient did preconception genetic testing of mother and father. And that's obviously not readily available to anyone.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so there's very few reliable tests that don't have any risk to them by the time you're already pregnant. So there is a blood test you can get that will tell you whether or not, with very good reliability, whether or not the baby will have really big genetic issues like Down syndrome, or kind of in that class of genetic issues. But it doesn't tell us very well the kind of minutia, smaller genetic issues. To get a good test of that, you often have to get a sampling of part of the placenta, which of course has its own risks to it.
What about in vitro treatment? Like a lot of babies might have heart issues and things like that. Would a physician still be able to treat that child in vitro like that? Doing, like, let's say they had a mild heart where they have gone, in and actually treated the child maybe before it's been born. Would you be, if you detected it, would you still be able to perform the procedure under the current law?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. Because
Because that's saving the child.
right, it's.
Well, risk.
Okay, I think that right now, our only hope for anything in the immediate future is Attorney General's Josh Kaul's case, which refers to, in 1970, there was, 3 years before Roe versus Wade, there was a panel of federal judges in the Eastern District of Wisconsin that decided a case, and they said that the court agreed that holding that under the 9th Amendment of the Constitution, a woman has the basic right to decide whether she should carry or reject an embryo which is not quickened. And so I think that's maybe what he's fighting. I'm not sure of that, but I think that's what he's fighting for. And, you know, we need to make sure that that fight goes on. Because otherwise, the only other way to change this law in Wisconsin, I believe, is that our Republican legislature either allows a referendum for people to decide and then goes with the referendum results, or else does like Governor Evers wants to do, is just, go back to the ruling, you know, that we had, what we had, including Roe versus Wade, you know, that kind of situation.
I think that's one of the things to think about when you go to the voting booth in November is, I mean, I don't know that people often think about the importance of the Attorney General at a state level, right? I mean, they're incredibly important, but I don't know that people always take into account how big of a deal that is. I mean, right now, that is the protection for physicians in this state.
Josh Kaul has openly said that he will not prosecute any provider who gives abortion services here in the state of Wisconsin.
But there aren't many that are taking that chance.
Correct. Because
Especially if you live in a Republican area.
doesn't mean that, right, other local DAs or other law enforcement could not still override.
I have a question. You said it's only the Attorney General or the Assembly or whatever that can bring up a referendum. Can't the public do it with signatures? Because didn't they do that in Michigan?
Okay, well,
Well, I think
what-
Michigan just-
what happened was Governor Evers just asked for the possibility, asked the legislature if they would convene to allow us to change our constitution so that we could have referendums, not just on this issue, but maybe on marijuana and other issues that people really want. And they gavelled in and gavelled out, just like that.
Yep, less than 1 minute. They turned it down and left.
Well, what-
So because of our constitution in the
times.
state of Wisconsin, no, we cannot have a referendum.
So the only way, I'm just asking this question, the only way we can have a referendum is if our state assembly and state senate ask for one?
Well, they changed the
Well, the governor-
constitution so
The
that.
governor asked for one.
The governor asked that we, the legislature themselves could vote and accept Governor Evers' suggestion that they,
It's like what they did in
change the law.
Kansas. They put it as a referendum. Wisconsin doesn't have that ability to do that as a referendum vote. It's never been in a constitution. That's why Governor Evers had to go before the legislature to ask for it. Even in a local community basis, we can't do that. So, but what they essentially did by gaveling in and gavelled out is they took the right of the public, men and women, away from us to decide this issue, period. So how many are in the legislature, Jan? What's the number?
In the state?
Well, there's the Senate and there's the Assembly, so,
So it's 20 some odd people, what have you?
no, well, the Assembly has a lot more than the Senate it's 99.
Well, the point I'm trying to make is, let's say it's 20 people, I'm not hearing you well. They took the right of what is the population of the state of Wisconsin. That select group, few people in that group, all male, decided, took it upon themselves to make the decision for, let's say there's 3 million people in the state of Wisconsin. They took that right away from all of us. And like Jan said, it's not only about the abortion issue, but there could be other issues of concern in a lot of aspects of things. Concerned citizens would like to have something on the ballot that the community or the state as a whole would have a say so over. This legislature has done this on more than just this issue. So when you go into the voting booth, if you vote for something like this, you're voting for an individual who will vote to take your right away from you.
And Dr. Bourne, you had some closing argument on that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, this is an intersection of medicine and politics and health and politics,
Yes.
human rights and politics, right? And we don't have a lot of power because yes, certain things have been taken away. And the reality is that the Wisconsin legislature is going to be Republican for a long time. And there's historical reasons for that. But it's going to be, and we can work to change that. But we can also just make sure that we are voting for the people who do have the power to keep those safety measures in place, like Josh Kaul, Tony Evers, getting Ron Johnson out of the Senate and getting Mandela Barnes into the Senate. These are things that we can do to keep things from going even further backwards.
Right now, Lindsey Graham is pushing, put it before the Supreme Court, even though they have put it into the hands of the legislatures of the states to go national with this. And once that happens, no governor, no attorney general is going to be offering any viable protection for the medical community.
I just want to say one last thing too. I know that, of course, the election's coming up next month, but in April, there's also a very important election, and that's on who one of our state Supreme Court justices are.
Yes.
So if we can show my colors, we can get the conservative incumbent out and get a more liberal person in, then that is another way that we can fight both the gerrymandering issue as well as all the other issues we talked about.
Everett Mitchell.
Everett Mitchell, we had him at our dinner. He was amazing, just an amazing man.
Well, I want to thank our doctors this evening. I think we all learned something. I'll have at each entrance, some of these comparisons that you can, something that you can share with others as to what the Democrats are saying about the choice and what the Republicans are saying. And, there's also a card on the back here that you can join the effort for defending choice. So anyway, we'll put those at the entrance, and thank you for coming.
Thank you. And ladies, this is going to be probably the main issue of this election. And we just ask that you will all row, row, row the vote.